Look, it's like 8 a.m. I finally got employed, but don't start till like next month. So here I am, having consumed an ungodly amount of McDonald's and having played Infinite Warfare Zombies for 6 straight ass hours. My frontal lobe is sliding off the bone, if there's even a bone in there. To be honest, I don't know if there's anything in there when it comes to me, but I'm about to explain how this clown-coded Call of Duty side mode unintentionally teaches you about the simulated nature of modern reality. But before that, I need to say something very important. Infinite Warfare Zombies is maybe better than Treyarch Zombies. Now don't click off, I'm aware that what I just said is equivalent to showing up at a Catholic wedding and pulling out the Quran, reading Bible verses to the non-binary kid type beat, but look, just hear me out, alright? Because here's the thing. Treyarch Zombies is a tragic Lovecraftian odyssey about the metaphysics of time, the folly of man, and whether or not your soul has a weight class. Meanwhile, IW Zombies is about a guy named Willawila who sounds like a failed magician that sells ketamine to high schoolers, trapping you inside the cinematic embodiment of cocaine and making you fight discount John Travolta in a disco. And yet, somehow, they both arrive at the same place. Now look, Treyarch had multiverses and occult wars. IW gives you 4 cartoon characters trapped in a VHS tape. But IW does something strange. It wears its stupidity so confidently that you forget it's trying to kill you. It's deliberately dumb. So dumb, in fact, that you stop asking questions. It invites you into its neon-stained nostalgia trip with a smile, hands you a Twizzler, then smacks you right in the fucking ass cheeks with metaphysical despair. Left and right, as I always say, bro. Like you're in Spaceland and you think you're here to shoot clowns, but those clowns are you. You're the clown. You've always been the clown. But before we get into any of that, let's talk about this game as a devious little psyop. IW Zombies is essentially the gaming equivalent of that one theater kid who vapes behind the gym and knows a little bit too much about David Lynch. It looks dumb. It acts dumb, but then it starts quoting Jean Baudrillard at you mid-conversation, and you realize something. Oh no, this motherfucker got layers forever. Now again, go back to Spaceland, bro. Look, you spawn into a theme park surrounded by bright lights, one-liners, and an announcer who sounds like he squirts glitter. You're shooting balloon-headed clowns with a squirt gun. It feels like a Saturday morning cartoon, but then you notice the blood-stained surroundings. The park's being empty. It loops the same announcements, the games barely work, the animatronics and shit are rotting, bro. Like, you realize that this isn't a theme park, alright? It's a fucking prison made out of branding. It's not nostalgic. It's neon taxidermy, alright? Which brings us to the main course. Now everyone thinks that this is the funny zombies, you know, the one from the game that dropped after Ghosts, the one your cousin bought instead of Black Ops 3, and the one you pretended didn't exist until 2025 when someone on TikTok posted a clip saying, no, but like for real though, IW Zombies, TS low-key tough, TS PMO type shit for real. And now you're here. Now you're watching a grown adult, me, crouch in front of a cartoon soda machine in a haunted theme park while playing stock carnival music and calling this a video essay. This is not just any video essay, however, bro. It's a Rick Fire and Paula video, alright? You already know I'm about to be starting off with the type of outdated shit an uncle would say to you to relate to you. You know, like, haha, clowns, zombies doing the Dougie, this zombie got 67 for real. But like somewhere along the way, alright, I don't know what happens, but we're gonna be starting to talk about like fucking MK Ultra, bro. Like, well, I don't know how this shit happens, but it always does, bro. Like, but don't worry, that part comes later. For now, let's get silly. Alright, let's mock Infinite Warfare like it deserves. Alright, let's talk about how Willawila looks like a Quentin Tarantino B-side clone who, isn't into feet, thankfully. But like, look, let's talk about how the main cast sounds like Twitch streamers after 3 bang energy drinks. Let's talk about Spaceland when you kill zombies while Michael Jackson's ghost does the moonwalk across a bloodstained dance floor. IW Zombies is basically what happens if you handed the Treyarch Zombies formula to a group of exhausted creatives on a Disney cruise who were high on pop rocks and, trauma. It's the kind of game mode where the final boss isn't an ancient apocalyptic god, but rather just Neil Patrick Harris doing a bit. It's ridiculous, it's stupid, but here's the thing. It knows it's a cartoon, it knows it's fake, it's all a movie within a movie sort of thing. The characters are actors, kidnapped and forced to play roles inside a simulation. And that's the entire fucking thing. Look, Let me put it this way, alright? Oh shit. Alright, let me put it this way, alright? You ever just like stare at a clown for too long? Like actually stare? Not at a party, not at a circus. I mean like, look, full eye contact, no blinking, complete silence. Try it sometime. Look, that oversized smile starts looking like a prison. That painted on joy starts peeling into something way more existential. At least that's what happened last time I tried it, though. Now that I think about it, I did hit my questionable friend's vape that turned out to be laced with ketamine that day, but that's IW zombies. Even the ketamine part. And to an extent, that's the world we live in now. See, IW zombies and games like it are reflections of something deeper, something horrifying, something called Simulacra. Let's break it down. Let me present to you Jean Baudrillard. This is not some overpriced cologne, alright, but rather a French philosopher. Now this motherfucker said that we live in a world where representations of shit have replaced the real shit. We don't interact with the real thing anymore. We interact with copies of it, and then copies of those copies, until there's nothing real left. Only symbols pretending to be real. Think of it like this, alright? So first off, we got first order simulacrum, alright? Let's say a photo of a real battlefield. The second order would be a movie based on that photo. The third order is a TikTok using that movie sound, some funk music playing in the background, filtered with subtitles and a caption of some shit like "War is a web, for real, this shit's so tough." And the fourth order, finally, is your memory of war. Having never been to war, but built entirely on what you've seen through those screens. At this point, we're not even experiencing reality. We're experiencing a simulation of reality. A funhouse mirror, distorted, curated, aestheticized, and we like it that way. Speaking of those TikToks, I'm sure you've seen it, alright? Those TikToks that slap funk music over footage of shit like drone strikes. Yeah, that's Simulacra, alright? Like you're watching real human suffering, but it's layered under these ironic edits, meme sound effects, and AI-generated captions with like a wilted rose emoji or some shit. That pain is real, but the presentation is entertainment, aesthetic, consumable. The game takes real-world horror, you know, the undead, violence, mass death, and wraps it in movie sets, arcade filters, and David Hasselhoff. But you don't feel scared, you feel amused. That's the point. It's how we cope now, not with mourning, not with reflection, but with memes, with detachment, with TikToks, with scrolling past war crimes like their album drops. And that's why it's so terrifying. It's not inherently bad that we deal with suffering and negativity through humor, like it's utterly human, right? I do it all the time, lots of people do. But what happens when that aspect of our humanity is actively exploited by a third party? Let's talk about Metal Gear Solid 2, or what I call the original Simulacra build game. In MGS2, you do these missions, right? You know, you follow instructions, you genuinely try to help the world. Classic hero fantasy kind of thing. Then, it turns out, the entire thing was a lie all along. You think you've been playing real missions, following real objectives, but everything, the instructions, the characters, the goals, it's all scripted. Not because the devs were lazy, but because there's this AI actively testing upon the protagonist, controlling the missions, testing how humans respond to curated data. Does this sound familiar? In a less extreme way, it's literally the internet now. Algorithms are the AI in MGS2. TikTok, YouTube, Insta, all of them, feeding us curated versions of reality and watching how we react. Not necessarily with evil intentions, just optimization, engagement, watch time, retention. But then, of course, you factor in real-life political psyops that serve to distract from bigger issues. Recommended to the masses on every platform. Manufactured memes, crafted debates, just to create some sort of culture war or the other to distract from said bigger issues like what's happening with a certain list right now. And slowly, what we call quote-unquote real life starts to look more and more like content. We even narrate our own lives like it's a vlog, or worse, a meme. Everything becomes humorous. Satire. In MGS2, memes were a big thing. Not the funny kind, but the Richard Dawkins kind. Ideas, cultural DNA, concepts that spread like viruses. Information, the official definition of a meme. Memes override truth. They reduce complex realities into shareable, catchy, and emotionally loaded fragments. Not the war in X place is killing Y people, but free X place, ratio Y party. I've seen real people compare horrors inflicted upon their countries as if it's some form of oppression Olympics. People are much more likely to think and behave a certain way if they're validated or stimulated in some capacity. And these memes, especially the serious ones, exist to provide that validation. They abstract real pain into consumable formats. IW Zombies does the exact same thing. Complex horror turned into a roller coaster, quite literally. I mean, look at the cast, alright? Look, you've got AJ, the token jock with softcore swagger, shout out IGN. Sally, the sassy rebel who sounds like she vapes Monster Energy. Andre, who acts like he's one bad day away from dropping a mixtape called Trust Issues in the 80s. And Poindexter, a Reddit mod in the body of a Fortnite streamer. And they're all flung headfirst into Willa Willa's cartoonified horror dimensions like it's a Halloween episode of Scooby-Doo X, The Truman Show. Look, the entire thing is satire, right? Or so it seems. Because the real horror isn't the setting or even the zombies. It's that they know it's fake, but are led into accepting it as reality. These aren't characters in a horror movie. They're characters about characters in a horror movie. Being acted by characters who think they're in a movie. They're puppets, not just to Weiler, the sinister director who traps them in these genre films, but to us, the players, who feed off their struggle like content vultures with a controller. Every emotion they express, every desperate line delivery as they face down the undead, is hollowed out by the fact that they're operating inside a theme park, a skin, a simulation of horror, with all the edges filed off and all the violence coated in neon lights and one-liners. Think about it. Andre finds out he's gonna die for real if he fails the movie, right? He finally sees through the cracks in the screen, and what does he do? He still cracks jokes. He still plays the role. Why? Because even in death, the role is more powerful than the man. They've been rewritten. Their suffering is stylized. Their pain is a set piece. Their entire existence is bound by aesthetic tropes. Zombies in space, campy 90s slasher, David Hasselhoff with a ray gun. It's horror as spectacle, fear as theme park rides, simulacrum. What once began as a reflection of horror, zombies as allegory, as social metaphor, is now just a shadow of its shadow. And the tragedy of the characters is this: they're trying to break out. There's a reason they get smarter, okay? There's a reason Poindexter starts questioning everything. There's a reason we fight a servant of the devil himself, Mephistopheles, the final boss, who represents not evil, but infinite production, the endless cycle. The whole story happened only because Weiler made some Faustian bargain with Mephistopheles. The catch was this studio system that churns lives, fear, and blood into entertainment by trapping vulnerable souls. It's not hell, but content. When AJ screams, he's not afraid, he's delivering a line. When Sally rebels, it's not against the system, it's written in the script. Even their liberation is staged, even their defiance is a product. That's the real horror. When your rebellion is pre-rendered, when your scream is part of the soundtrack, when every version of you, real, performed, imagined, is owned by someone else. So let's say you've grown up in this world of Simulacra. You've never seen tragedy firsthand. You've only seen a filtered online versions of it. What does Simulacra predict? What happened to it? How you feel when you're, say, placed in the battlefield out there in the real life? To be simple, it doesn't predict anything major. It just predicts that you'll be confused. You'll dissociate. Won't know how to process your emotions the way you should. I've always seen these jokes of, if Gen Z were to ever get drafted in the war, we just meme the shit out of it, We just, cope with humor. We'd say this shit is so tough while gunning down some civilians or whatever the fuck, That'll probably happen. That's a great representation of the effect all of this has. When you're out there on the battlefield, there's no music, there's no caption, there's just mud, blood, cold, the smell. One of the biggest things veterans recount as, the most horrifying aspects of war is just a smell. The smell of rot, blood, and death. You won't feel grief, you won't feel rage, you won't even feel scared, really. Just because the ability to feel has been flattened. This horror itself has just become something consumable. Now, what I want you to take away from this is not the idea that, hey, yeah, you know, like, was any of this real? No. What I want you to take away from this is the idea that, hey, why doesn't it feel real? Ask why pain has to come with a punchline now. Ask why we flinch less at corpses than we do at spoilers. Because maybe that's the scariest part. Not that we're watching suffering on loop, but that we're really good at it. To all the people who watch me for my horror content, bro, look at that shit, bro. I'm not giving a trigger warning because I really do be not getting for that woke shit, brother.